Have you ever met someone who always wants to be right? Someone who never really listens because, deep down, they believe they already have the answer before you even finish your sentence? Maybe you have worked with a person like this, studied with them, or maybe, and this is the uncomfortable part, maybe you have caught yourself doing exactly the same thing. Today, on Code Your English, we are going to talk about something that affects every single one of us, no matter our age, our job, or how many diplomas we have hanging on our wall. Knowledge is valuable. Nobody is arguing against that. Spending years studying a subject, mastering a skill, or becoming an expert in your field is something to be proud of. But there is a hidden danger that comes with knowledge, and it rarely gets talked about. The danger is not the knowledge itself, it is the attitude that can grow around it. When someone starts believing that they already know enough, that they have nothing left to learn, something inside them quietly begins to close. This is what we call a closed mindset, and it can become one of the biggest barriers to growth a person will ever face. So let's introduce the main message of today's episode clearly, because everything we discuss will circle back to this one idea. Real intelligence is not about having all the answers. Real intelligence is having the ability, and more importantly, the willingness, to keep searching for better answers. Think about that for a moment. It is not about arriving at a final destination of knowledge. It is about staying on the road, continuing the journey, even when you think you have already arrived. If you look at the greatest thinkers in history, the most successful entrepreneurs, the wisest teachers, and the people who seem to keep growing decade after decade, you will notice they all share one common quality. They remain students of life. They never fully graduate from learning. Whether they are 80 years old or 20 years old, they carry the same hunger, the same openness, the same willingness to be surprised by something new. That is the illusion of knowledge we want to break apart today. The false belief that knowing a lot means you no longer need to keep learning. Before we continue, I want you to genuinely reflect on your own mindset. Are you someone who remains open-minded even when a new idea challenges what you already believe? Or do you sometimes catch yourself defending your opinions simply because admitting you were wrong feels uncomfortable? There is no judgment here. This is simply an invitation to notice. And remember these useful expressions we just used, because they will come back throughout the episode. A closed mindset, a barrier to growth, an illusion of knowledge, remain open-minded, and a lifelong learner. Keep these in your vocabulary notebook, because we are going to build on them as we go deeper into this topic. The difference between someone who knows and someone who learns. Now, let's get into the heart of today's episode, because understanding this difference will change the way you see people around you, and maybe the way you see yourself. There is a huge difference between simply collecting information and developing what we call a learning mindset. You can memorize 1,000 facts and still never develop the habit of true learning. On the other hand, someone with very little formal education can have an incredibly powerful learning mindset simply because of how they approach the world. Let's break this down into two types of people, because this contrast will make everything crystal clear. First, there is the person who wants to know everything. This person's main motivation is to look intelligent. Their focus is not really on discovering truth. It is on proving themselves right in front of others. Because of this, they feel deeply uncomfortable admitting mistakes, since a mistake feels like a threat to the image they are trying to protect. They tend to avoid situations where they might look inexperienced or unprepared, and worst of all, they see questions, especially their own questions, as a sign of weakness. A perfect example of this type of person is someone who says, "I already know this," before the other person has even finished explaining. They interrupt not because they understand fully, but because they need to protect their identity as someone who is already smart. Now compare that to the second type, the person who wants to learn. This person is curious by nature. They ask questions freely without embarrassment, because they understand that a question is not a confession of ignorance. It is a tool for growth. They accept mistakes as a natural part of the process rather than a personal failure. They are constantly searching for improvement, and, most importantly, they understand something profound. Knowledge has no finish line. There is no point where you can say, "I have learned enough. I can stop now." A perfect example of this mindset is someone who says, "I understand this, but I wonder what else I can discover." Notice the difference in energy between these two statements. One is closed and defensive. The other is open and expansive. Here is the key message I want you to carry with you from this section. The smartest person in the room is often not the person who speaks the most. It is often the person who listens carefully and learns continuously. Think about the people you admire most: teachers, mentors, leaders. Chances are, the ones who impressed you most were not necessarily the loudest voices. They were the ones who asked thoughtful questions, who listened with full attention, and who seemed genuinely interested in what you had to say, even if they already knew more than you did on the subject. As you continue practicing your English today, try to use these expressions naturally in conversation. A thirst for knowledge, a willingness to improve, a hunger for growth, and a learning mindset. These phrases are not just vocabulary for a test. They describe a way of living that can transform how you grow, both in English and in life. Think for a moment about your own experience learning English. Have you ever met a fellow student who insisted they already understood a grammar rule perfectly, only to make the exact same mistake a week later, because they refused to slow down and truly examine it? Compare that to a student who says, "I think I understand the present perfect now, but I still want more practice with it, just to be sure." That second student, even if they currently know less, will almost certainly progress faster in the long run, simply because their mindset is built around discovery rather than defense. This is exactly why, on this podcast, we constantly remind you that mistakes in English are not embarrassing moments to hide. They are signposts pointing you toward exactly what to study next. It's also worth noting that this difference between knowing and learning shows up far beyond the classroom. In friendships, the person who wants to learn asks their friend genuine questions about their life, their culture, their perspective, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. In the workplace, the employee who wants to learn welcomes feedback from a manager as useful data rather than a personal attack. In relationships, the partner who wants to learn listens to criticism as an opportunity to understand their partner more deeply, instead of immediately becoming defensive. Once you start noticing this pattern, you will see it everywhere: in how people react to being corrected, in how they respond to new information that contradicts what they previously believed, and in how comfortable they are saying the simple words, "I hadn't thought of it that way before." Why people stop learning. The psychology behind it. Now that we understand the difference between knowing and learning, let's ask a deeper question. Why do so many people stop learning in the first place? This is not a simple question, and the answer involves psychology, emotion, and something we all carry inside us: the ego. Learning requires humility, and the human ego often stands directly in the way of that humility. Let's explore 3 of the most common reasons people become mentally stuck. The first reason is ego. People often protect their identity without even realizing they are doing it. Thoughts like, "I am already good at this," "I don't need help," or "I know better," are not always spoken out loud, but they exist quietly in the back of the mind, shaping decisions and reactions. The ego wants to protect our image, the version of ourselves that we present to the world, and honestly, the version we sometimes present to ourselves. But growth requires vulnerability. It requires the willingness to say, I might be wrong here, or I have more to learn. Without that vulnerability, the ego builds walls instead of bridges. The second reason is the comfort zone. Learning, by its very nature, means entering unfamiliar territory. It means stepping into a space where you don't have all the answers yet, where you might stumble, where you might feel a little lost before things start making sense. Many people avoid learning simply because it feels uncomfortable. There is a real fear of failing, and there is also a fear of looking like a beginner in front of others, especially if those others already see you as competent or experienced in some other area. But here is something important to remember. Being a beginner again is not a weakness. It is the beginning of improvement. Every expert you admire was once a nervous beginner who decided to stay in the discomfort long enough to grow past it. The third reason is the fear of being wrong. Many people unconsciously connect mistakes with failure, as if making an error somehow proves that they are incapable or not good enough. This connection is one of the most damaging beliefs a person can carry, because it turns every attempt at learning into a high-stakes test of self-worth. But mistakes are not proof that you are incapable. Mistakes are information that helps you improve. Every mistake carries a lesson inside it, waiting to be discovered, if only you are willing to look at it with curiosity instead of shame. My goal in sharing this section is not to make you feel judged for any of these patterns. Honestly, every human being experiences some version of ego protection, comfort zone avoidance, or fear of mistakes at different points in life. The goal is simply to help you understand yourself a little better without judgment, so that you can begin making different choices moving forward. As you reflect on this, hold on to these expressions. Step outside your comfort zone, embrace mistakes, challenge your assumptions, and overcome the fear of failure. These are not just abstract ideas. They are practical tools you can apply the next time you feel resistance to learning something new, whether it's a grammar rule in English or a skill in your career. There is also a fourth, quieter reason people stop learning, and it's one that deserves special attention. Overconfidence built from past success. Sometimes the very thing that once helped someone grow becomes the thing that eventually holds them back. A person who succeeded using a particular method, a particular set of beliefs, or a particular approach to problems can start to assume that this same formula will always work in every future situation. This is a subtle trap because it isn't driven by laziness or fear in the obvious sense. It's driven by the comfortable assumption that what worked before will keep working now. The world, however, rarely stays still long enough for that assumption to remain true. This is precisely why some of the most experienced professionals in any field can suddenly fall behind newer, less experienced people who are simply more willing to question old assumptions and try new approaches. Understanding these psychological patterns, ego, comfort zone, fear of being wrong, and overconfidence from past success, gives you something incredibly valuable: awareness. Once you can recognize these patterns in yourself, you gain the power to interrupt them before they quietly shut down your growth. The next time you notice yourself resisting a new idea, ask yourself honestly, which of these four forces might be at play? Is it your ego trying to protect your image? Is it simple discomfort with unfamiliar territory? Is it a fear that making a mistake will define you? Or is it an old success making you overconfident about the present? Naming the force weakens its grip on you. The power of curiosity. The secret habit of great learners. If ego and fear are the forces that shut learning down, curiosity is the force that keeps it alive. In this section, we want to show you why curiosity is one of the most important skills a person can develop in life. And yes, curiosity is a skill, not just a personality trait you either have or don't have. It can be practiced and strengthened just like a muscle. Curious people share a few noticeable habits. They ask better questions than the average person because they are not trying to prove anything. They are genuinely trying to understand. They explore new ideas even when those ideas don't immediately benefit them in an obvious, practical way. They see opportunities everywhere, in ordinary situations that other people might walk right past without a second thought. And perhaps, most beautifully, they learn from everyone, regardless of that person's age, job title, education level, or social status. Here is a distinction worth remembering. A curious person does not typically ask, "Why should I learn this?" That question comes from a mindset focused on immediate usefulness, on justifying effort before it's even been made. Instead, a curious person asks, "What can this teach me?" This small shift in language reflects a much bigger shift in mindset, from resistance to openness, from calculation to wonder. Think about how a child learns. Children absorb language, movement, social rules, and countless other skills at an incredible speed. And one of the biggest reasons is their natural curiosity. They are not embarrassed to ask why 100 times a day. They are not afraid of looking silly when they try something new and fail. Somewhere along the way, many adults lose this quality, often because of the ego protection and fear we discussed earlier. But successful people, the ones who continue growing throughout their entire lives, manage to maintain that childlike curiosity well into adulthood. Scientists keep asking questions about the universe even after decades of research. Entrepreneurs keep studying markets and human behavior even after building successful companies. Artists keep experimenting with new techniques even after mastering their craft. Leaders keep listening to new perspectives even after years of experience. None of them ever believe they have reached the final stage of understanding, because in their minds, there is no final stage. As you build your own curiosity muscle, try weaving these expressions into your daily English practice. Stay curious, explore new possibilities, expand your perspective, and look at things from a different angle. Say them out loud. Use them in a sentence about your own life today. Language becomes real when we use it to describe something we actually feel or intend to do. Why being a lifelong learner is more important than ever. Let's now connect this topic to the world we actually live in today, because this is not just a nice philosophical idea, it is a practical necessity. The world changes constantly, which means learning simply cannot stop if we want to remain capable and relevant. Consider how quickly technology changes. Jobs change alongside it, sometimes disappearing entirely and being replaced by roles that didn't even exist a decade earlier. Society changes its expectations, its communication styles, its values. And because of all this movement, new skills become necessary almost every single year. Here is a sentence worth repeating to yourself often. The knowledge that makes you successful today may not be enough tomorrow. This is not meant to create anxiety. It is meant to create motivation, a reason to keep growing instead of settling into comfort. Let's look at a few concrete examples. A programmer who learned a certain coding language 10 years ago must continue learning new technologies, new frameworks, and new best practices, or their skills will slowly become outdated. A teacher who was trained using one set of methods must continue understanding new learning methods, new classroom technologies, and new ways of reaching students who grew up in a completely different environment than the teacher did. A business owner who built a successful company using one strategy must continue adapting to new markets, new customer behaviors, and new competition, because standing still in business often means falling behind. The main message here is simple but powerful. The future belongs to people who can adapt and continue learning. It does not necessarily belong to the smartest people or the people with the most impressive credentials. It belongs to the people who remain flexible, curious, and willing to update their understanding as the world around them shifts. As you think about your own field, your own career, or your own personal goals, ask yourself honestly, am I keeping up with change, or am I relying on knowledge that might already be becoming outdated? Use these expressions as you reflect. Keep up with change, adapt to new situations, stay relevant, and develop new skills. These are phrases you will find useful not only in English conversations, but in job interviews, professional emails, and everyday discussions about growth. This applies directly to language learning as well, and it's worth pausing on this connection specifically. The English you needed 10 years ago is not necessarily the English you need today. New expressions enter everyday conversation. New communication styles emerge through video calls, messaging apps, and international collaboration, and new professional vocabulary appears as industries evolve. A person who learned English purely for reading textbooks decades ago might struggle in a modern video meeting filled with casual expressions, idioms, and fast-paced back-and-forth conversation. This is exactly why lifelong learners of English, people like you, listening to this podcast, continue exposing themselves to real, current, evolving language rather than freezing their knowledge at whatever level they reached years ago. Every episode of this podcast is, in a small way, an act of staying relevant in a world that never stops moving. The importance of humility in learning. Now we arrive at one of the most important qualities connected to learning: humility. Let's be clear about what humility actually means here, because it is often misunderstood. Humility does not mean thinking less of yourself, and it certainly does not mean having low self-esteem or constantly doubting your abilities. Humility simply means understanding that you always have more to discover, no matter how much you already know. A humble person is someone who can say certain sentences without feeling destroyed by them. They can say, "I was wrong." They can say, "I don't know." They can even say, "Can you teach me?" to someone with far less experience or status than themselves. At first glance, these sentences might sound like admissions of weakness, especially to someone still operating from an ego-driven mindset. But in reality, these sentences are signs of confidence and maturity. It takes real strength to admit you were wrong. It takes real security to say, "I don't know," without feeling like your entire identity is falling apart. And it takes real wisdom to ask someone else, regardless of their title or age, to teach you something. This is why so many highly successful people intentionally surround themselves with people who know more than they do in specific areas. They understand something crucial. No single person can learn everything alone. Instead of feeling threatened by someone else's expertise, they see it as an opportunity, a resource, a chance to expand their own understanding faster than they could on their own. This is intellectual humility in action. The willingness to accept your limitations, to learn from others, and to approach every relationship, whether professional or personal, with a genuine willingness to listen. As you continue building your English vocabulary today, add these expressions to your collection. Intellectual humility, accept your limitations, learn from others, and a willingness to listen. Notice how these phrases connect learning not just to books and information, but to relationships and character. How to develop a learner's mindset in daily life. By now, you understand why learning matters and what stops people from doing it. So let's move into something practical. How do you actually build a learner's mindset in your everyday life? The truth is, a learning mindset is not built through one dramatic decision. It is built through small daily actions, repeated consistently over time. The first habit is to ask more questions. Instead of pretending to know something you don't fully understand, become curious about it instead. Practice asking yourself simple but powerful questions like, "What can I learn from this?" Or, "What am I missing?" These questions redirect your mind away from defensive thinking and toward open exploration. The second habit is to read and listen regularly. I want to remove a common excuse right now. Learning does not require hours of your day. Even 15 minutes daily, whether reading a book, listening to a podcast like this one, or studying new English vocabulary, creates real progress over time. Consistency matters far more than intensity. The third habit is to learn from mistakes. After any failure, big or small, ask yourself, what did this experience teach me? This single question transforms a painful moment into a valuable lesson. It does not erase the disappointment of failing, but it gives that disappointment a purpose. The fourth habit is to learn from everyone. Every person you meet, regardless of their background, education, or position in life, has something valuable to teach you. Maybe it's a piece of practical wisdom. Maybe it's a different perspective. Maybe it's simply a reminder of how to stay patient or kind. Approach every conversation with the assumption that you might learn something, and you often will. The fifth habit is to teach others. This might seem surprising in a list about learning, but teaching is one of the most powerful ways to deepen your own understanding. When you try to explain an idea clearly to someone else, you quickly discover the gaps in your own knowledge, and you are forced to organize your thoughts more clearly than before. As you practice these habits, use these expressions to describe your progress. Build a habit, make continuous improvement, learn from experience, and turn mistakes into lessons. Try writing a sentence today describing one small habit you want to build, using one of these expressions. Let me add one more practical suggestion that ties all 5 habits together. Keep a simple learning journal. It doesn't need to be complicated or time-consuming. A single notebook, or even a note on your phone where you write down one thing you learned each day, is enough to create a powerful shift over time. On difficult days, when you feel like you haven't made any progress at all, this journal becomes proof that growth has been happening quietly, even when it wasn't obvious in the moment. Many lifelong learners describe this simple habit as one of the most transformative changes they ever made, precisely because it turns invisible daily progress into something visible and undeniable. For English learners specifically, this might mean writing down one new expression you heard, one mistake you made and corrected, or one moment where you understood something in English that would have confused you a year ago. The connection between learning and success. Let's now explore something that connects everything we've discussed so far to the bigger picture of a meaningful life. Learning is not only about accumulating knowledge for its own sake. It is about creating a better life, a life with deeper relationships, clearer decisions, stronger skills, and richer understanding. Here is an important distinction. Success belongs to people who continue improving, not necessarily to people who are simply talented or lucky at the start. Many people focus their energy on becoming successful, chasing titles, achievements, recognition, and validation from others. But successful people, the ones who sustain that success over years and decades, tend to focus instead on becoming better. This shift in focus changes everything about how a person approaches their days. Consider the difference between these two questions. The first question is, how can I prove I am good? This question is rooted in insecurity and external validation. It looks outward, seeking approval, seeking proof, seeking a finish line where you can finally rest. and say you have arrived. The second question is, how can I become better? This question is rooted in growth and internal motivation. It looks forward, always curious about the next step, never fully satisfied with staying exactly where you are. When you shift toward asking, how can I become better? You naturally start improving in areas that matter deeply. Better relationships, built on more patience and understanding. Better decisions, informed by more reflection and less impulsive reaction. Better skills, sharpened through consistent practice. And better understanding of yourself, of others, and of the world around you. As you reflect on your own definition of success, try using these expressions: personal growth, continuous improvement, reach your full potential, and become a better version of yourself. Notice how naturally these phrases apply, not just to English learning, but to every area of your life. Reflection section. Questions for the you. Before we move toward our conclusion, let's pause together for a moment of genuine reflection, because learning begins with self-awareness. I want you to actually sit with these questions rather than rushing past them. If it helps, pause this episode for a minute after each question and let yourself answer honestly, even if the answer is uncomfortable. When was the last time you learned something completely new? Not something small or automatic, but something that genuinely challenged you and required real effort. Do you sometimes avoid learning because you fear being a beginner again? Is there an activity, a skill, or a subject you have avoided simply because you don't want to feel inexperienced? Are you more focused on being right or becoming better? Think about your recent conversations, disagreements, or decisions, and be honest with yourself about which motivation was truly driving you. What is one skill you want to improve? It could be related to your career, your relationships, your health, or, of course, your English. And finally, what belief do you need to question? Is there something you have assumed to be true for years, simply because you never took the time to examine it more closely? Take your time with these questions. There is no rush, and there is no perfect answer. The simple act of asking yourself these questions is already a form of learning in itself. Final message: choose growth over ego. As we come toward the end of today's episode, let's bring everything together into one clear, memorable message. The goal of life, as we've explored today, is not to know everything. In fact, trying to know everything is an impossible and exhausting pursuit that ultimately leads to frustration rather than fulfillment. The real goal is to always become better, one small step at a time. Let's summarize the key truths we've uncovered together throughout this episode. Nobody knows everything, no matter how many years of experience or how many accomplishments they've collected. Everyone, without exception, has something to learn, and often, everyone also has something valuable to teach. Mistakes are part of growth, not evidence against your worth or capability. Curiosity keeps us young, mentally flexible, and engaged with the world in a way that pure knowledge alone cannot provide. And humility makes us wiser, opening doors to understanding that ego would otherwise keep firmly closed. Here is the final message I want to leave with you today. The moment you believe you know everything is the moment you stop growing. It is a quiet moment, often unnoticed, but its effects ripple through every area of life. Relationships that stop deepening, skills that stop improving, opportunities that quietly pass by unnoticed. But when you choose to remain a learner instead, something beautiful happens. Every experience becomes a lesson, waiting patiently to teach you something if you're willing to pay attention. Every person becomes a teacher, capable of showing you something new about the world or about yourself. And every single day becomes an opportunity to improve, even if that improvement is small and barely noticeable at first. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Learning English while exploring an idea that I truly believe can change the way you approach your entire life. Whether you listened while commuting, exercising, cooking, or simply relaxing at home, I appreciate you choosing to invest these minutes in your growth. I want to encourage you, as always, to keep practicing your listening skills by returning to episodes like this one whenever you have a spare moment. Keep speaking English out loud, even if you're alone in your room, because speaking builds confidence in a way that silent studying simply cannot. And most importantly, keep learning, not just English, but everything life continues to offer you. I would also love to invite you to share your thoughts on today's episode. Which question from our reflection section challenged you the most? Which expression do you want to practice using this week? Take a moment to practice these new expressions in a sentence about your own life. And if you're comfortable, share it in the comments or with a friend who is also learning English alongside you. Continue improving your English, one episode, one conversation, and one small habit at a time. And I want to leave you with one final thought to carry with you until our next episode together. Never be afraid to say, "I don't know yet," because yet means there is still room to grow. Thank you for learning with Code Your English. I'll see you in the next episode.